Anyone with the internet or one of those old-fashioned box things called televisions will have seen what's been going on with the Stephen Lawrence case recently. Now, Stephen Lawrence was a young black lad who was killed in 1993 in a racially motivated attack. He was waiting for a bus when it happened. Lots of things happened as a result of the Stephen Lawrence case. We had the McPherson report and the law changed, and not necessarily for the better, but that's a different story for another time. But at the moment, the press are going on and on and on. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it's right to remember Stephen Lawrence, and it's terrible what happened. But what we're seeing now is Prince Harry and his missus are out meeting the parents of Stephen Lawrence, Theresa May, Jeremy Corbyn, and they're all talking about this issue, and now they've created the Stephen Lawrence Day. Yet another way to remember Stephen Lawrence while ignoring victims of anti-white racial crime. And yes, it does happen. Now, I'm sad about the Stephen Lawrence case, don't get me wrong, but if he's getting a day, then where's the Charlene Downs Day? Now, Charlene Downs was a young girl in Blackpool. I've met her family quite a few times, actually. And in fact, this case, the Charlene Downs case, was my first sort of foray into politics. Is when I heard about this young girl who was kidnapped and raped by a Muslim grooming gang, and her body was never found. It's alleged that she was chopped up and put into kebab meat. In fact, I believe there are recordings of people joking about this, but the evidence fell through, and it's been a long, long time now, almost 20 years, I think. And nothing's happened since. Nothing's happened. Karen Downs, her mother, hasn't been appointed a baroness. There's no Charlene Downs Day. Why is that? Why is that? And by the way, when I talk about anti-white racial crime, this isn't some alt-right thing. It's not alt-right to admit that racial crime happens both ways round. And you know, the fact that anti-white racial crime exists is exactly the reason why the left tells you it doesn't, because they don't want to accept that it exists. They refuse to accept that white people might be innocent in something. I mean, it's pretty vile, the things that they say. Look at this Vice article. Dear white people, please stop pretending reverse racism is real. Well, please tell me, Manisha Krishnan, please tell me, then what was it when Charlene Downs was butchered, potentially put into kebab meat, taken away from her family's life destroyed? What was it when a Muslim grooming gang abducted her, raped her, and allegedly killed her, but racism? Because they did that because she was white. They did that because she was non-Muslim. She's kafar. She's nothing to them. And that poor white family suffered because of a racial crime, but it's not real. It's not real. You're more interested in the fact that maybe some white people did terrible things. Oh, some white people who appear in my background here did some terrible things a long, long time ago, but now you've got a very nice flat in London, and you're living the multicultural metropolitan lifestyle. You're doing a university course on feminist studies or something stupid like that, and you're the victim. Ha ha! Right, I get it. So anti-white racial crime doesn't exist. Well, I thought today maybe we'll look at a few cases of terrible, terrible things that have happened to white people over the years. And you can decide for yourself, does anti-white racism exist? So let's look at the story of Chris Donald. Now, this is a face everybody should know. If everybody knows Stephen Lawrence's face, if everybody knows Stephen Lawrence's family and Stephen Lawrence's case, everybody should know the case of Chris Donald. He's a 15-year-old white boy from Glasgow. He was kidnapped and murdered in 2004 by a gang of Pakistani men. He was stabbed, he was doused in petrol, and he was set on fire. The men who did it were found guilty of racially aggravated crimes and, of course, murder. This was done. He was abducted, set on fire and killed by these people because he was white. That's what the conviction was. Now, why isn't this case as prominent as Stephen Lawrence, I wonder? What about the case of Russ Parker? So Russ Parker was a 17-year-old white English boy who was murdered in an unprovoked, racially motivated attack. He was stabbed, he was beaten with a hammer, and repeatedly kicked by a gang of British Pakistani youths just 10 days after 9/11. Why aren't we talking about him? Then there's the murder of Richard Everett. In 1994, he was stabbed to death in London by a gang of Bangladeshis who were seeking revenge on a different white boy. And, you know, these cases go beyond murder. It's not just murder. One of the most heartbreaking things you can ever read out of stories like this is the case of Aaron Dugmore. He was a 9-year-old boy who was bullied to death. He was found in his bedroom dead. This 9-year-old little boy killed himself because he was being teased at school for being white by little Asian boys who no doubt learnt this stuff from their family. I mean, where else would they have learnt it from? He was threatened with plastic knives, and when he got upset about it, he was told the next time it will be real. It will be real. This poor little boy hung himself because he was white, because he'd been attacked for being white. What is that but anti-white racism? What is that but racism? What is that but real hatred based on race against this innocent little boy who had his whole life ahead of him? What is that but racism? What, but you think someone getting kicked out of Starbucks because they didn't buy a coffee is racism? Give me a break. And then over in America, there was the story of a white homeless man. He was in his 50s and he was attacked on a bus by a 27-year-old black man. And this black man shouted, "You owe me for making my grandmother a slave." The left created this violence when they perpetuate the idea that all white people are evil, all white people are enslavers. When they sit down and have the talk, have you heard of the talk? I only heard about this recently. When they sit a black child down and have the talk and tell them that they're going to be faced with a life of racism and prejudice and that they should always be prepared to be discriminated against by white people. When they do this, they're perpetuating a victim culture that puts people on the attack unnecessarily. It destroys lives. It ruins people into thinking that they're victims and that they're owed something, and it destroys their personalities, it destroys their life, and also it creates a race to the bottom, because the minute people start acting white, a lot of the black community start rejecting them and having a go at them and bullying them. This perpetual victimhood from the left, which says that white people can't be discriminated against or attacked because of their race, but we are the victims and we will always be victims and we must fight the system. It's destroying society. It's destroying the West. There is no reason why community tension has to exist in the West. There's no reason for it. And the only reason it exists, the only reason little boys are killing themselves because they're being bullied for being white, the only reason why this stuff is ignored is because the left have dominant control of the press and of the politicians, and they want to tell you that it doesn't exist. It's disgusting. It's sad. So if we're going to talk about what happened to Stephen Lawrence, and if we're going to say that what happened to him is terrible, we need to be honest and say that what happened to Charlene Downs was terrible, what happened to Amy Beale was terrible, what happened to Richard Everett was terrible, and what happened to little Aaron Dugmore was terrible too. If you want to see more from me and the rest of the Rebel team, remember to download our app on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and like and subscribe.